When you're going to make meatloaf, there are three things you want to think about. First of all, you want to think about the flavor. Secondly, the moisture. And third, the texture. So let's talk about the flavor first. First off, what meat are you going to use? You can mix your meats. We're going to use today beef because it has a nice bold meaty flavor, pork because it has a bit of a sweet note to it, and veal because it adds tenderness. We also want to add some flavor in the form of some vegetables. Here I've sauteed the onion, garlic, and carrot ahead of time. I like carrot in a meatloaf because it adds a little sweetness, but it's important to cook it first because it's not going to have a chance to get cooked once this meatloaf is formed and put into the oven. Then we're going to need some herbs to add some flavor as well. So I've got some dried thyme, some dried oregano, some fresh parsley, some Worcestershire sauce, and 1 teaspoon of salt. Now we have to think about how are we going to keep this meatloaf moist. I like to use milk. Milk adds obviously liquid, but milk is also a tenderizing agent, so it's also going to help us with the texture. Now, I've actually put my milk here with some oatmeal. You can put breadcrumbs, you can put oats in here. I soak them first, they absorb that milk, and then they give that moisture back to the meatloaf as it cooks. And those oats are actually also going to help keep this bound together, which means it's not going to fall apart when you bake it. What else are we going to use to bind it? 2 eggs, lightly beaten. We need a good grinding of pepper. And now we just have to mix it up. So once it's well mixed up, we just have to wash our hands. If you're not a huge fan of the crust on meatloaf and you just want the crust on the top, go ahead and use a loaf pan. But I do recommend using a special meatloaf pan that elevates the meatloaf from the bottom of the pan so that it's elevated out of its own fat. I like the crust on meatloaf, so I'm going to go ahead and make it right here on this sheet pan. So take the meatloaf mixture out and place it onto the sheet pan. If you overpack the meatloaf, it's going to be more dense. You want a meatloaf that is held together nicely, but is sliceable and still tender. I like to make it as high as I can. It will come out a little flatter, but that's okay. We're going to transfer this now to a 350-degree oven for just about an hour. So it's been about an hour in the oven. We have to make our glaze, which is super easy. It is simply some brown sugar mixed in with some ketchup. There are variations on glazes, but this one I think is the easiest I've come across. Let's take that meatloaf out of the oven, spread that glaze on, and pop it back in. Here it is, it's looking beautiful. Just this glaze spread across the top. Because the meatloaf's warm, it will start to melt a little bit and drift down the sides on its own, which is great. So after about 15 minutes of glazing time, it should be ready, but we have to check the temperature to make sure it's done. So, where do we stick the thermometer in order to take the temperature? That's the most important thing to know. It is right in the center, so stick that thermometer all the way in this way. It needs to come to 165 degrees. Once it's there, and it is, it's ready to go. But as with all meats, this meatloaf needs to rest in order to really retain its juices when you go to slice it. So simply let this be for 10 minutes. It's too hot to eat right now anyway. Then slice it up, serve it up, and make people happy. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to see more of the basics, click over here. If you'd like to see more about the bowl set I use to mix everything up, click over here. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for new basics, put them in the comments below.